So I often hear from the women that I work with who've experienced a loss or multiple losses and then are going into trying again, or maybe they're pregnant, and even those who've become mothers feeling a little bit ripped off by the whole experience because of their loss. It's changed their experience so much. They feel like they didn't get the experience that they were meant to have. And they fight this internal battle and they have this idea of what it should be, and their expectations don't line up. And I feel there's a lot of suffering in that experience of wishing it had have been one way when the reality is it's just not that way for you because you've had this loss and it does change your experience. So what I want to talk about today is how loss does change your experience of pregnancy, my experience of it, and I've also asked those of you in my community who've experienced this to share how you found pregnancy and motherhood after a loss. And I want to shine some light on those silver linings. I will never say that loss is a good experience or something that I would wish upon anyone, but I have found on the other side of it, there have been some really positive perspective changes that I've experienced that have really changed the way I experience both pregnancy and motherhood for the better. And so I want to share those with you in case you're feeling a little bit like, why bother going forward? It's never going to be the experience that I thought it would be now because of this loss. And hopefully to give you a little hope about what's to come and that there are so many good things still in store for you, even if you have had multiple losses along the way. So firstly, I want to talk about pregnancy. Yes, pregnancy after loss can be incredibly anxious. And I remember my next two pregnancies after my very first loss were the most intense. And I really hadn't taken the time to deal with that anxiety, to deal with that grief, and therefore I was really spiraling in anxiety. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to process any of those emotions. So I really recommend, if you are in that struggle, in that big spiral of anxiety after a loss and you're pregnant again, find some ways to manage the stress, the emotions, the anxiety. Your body really needs to process it. No matter how much you just try and push it down and ignore it, it's not going to go away. So if you are looking for some things to help, I do have lots of videos talking about pregnancy anxiety after loss, some yoga practices and some meditation. So I'll leave some of those linked below. But first of all, please know it is so normal to feel incredibly anxious, to worry about this baby, to not want to get attached because you're worried about losing the baby. And I really strongly believe that regardless of whether that pregnancy ends in a loss, you will regret not connecting to that baby, not giving that baby as much love as you can, even if their life happens to be short. So what happens after we have a loss and then we go into another pregnancy is we're so uncertain and we can't feel comfort in, we don't feel that comfort in seeing those two pink lines and being like, yes, I'm pregnant, and then allowing ourselves to dream about this baby and our life with this baby. And we feel like we've been ripped off of that certainty, and we feel like our experience is not like other women. But I want to remind you that actually every pregnancy is uncertain. And in many ways, the uncertainty is a veil that we wear and it's not real. Our lives are uncertain. Everything is uncertain in lives. And we as humans like to sit in certainty and feel comfortable, but really that's a fallacy. It doesn't exist. If you're really struggling with this idea that your experience of pregnancy is not what it should be, just let yourself just sit in a moment with this idea that actually all pregnancies are uncertain. Your awareness of that uncertainty has been heightened by loss, but that's because I think loss highlights to us how fragile life is and therefore how valuable it is. And so therefore your experience of pregnancy after loss, your awareness of the amazingness of it is also heightened. So we kind of get this heightened awareness of both the good and the bad. And while it can feel like, oh, it's just too much, you just need some really good techniques and tools to manage those heightened emotions. I remember when I fell pregnant with Luca, so this was after 3 losses and I had really done the work to get myself in a really good place. I knew how to manage my anxiety, and I really went into this pregnancy being like, you know what? I might get hurt, but I'm going to go all in. I'm going to love this baby from the moment he or she is conceived. I'm just going to put my heart on the line and it will be worth it. Just knew that it was all worth it. So I went all in. And yes, my anxiety was heightened, my worry was heightened, but also my absolute joy was heightened. So yes, there were still things in that pregnancy that were uncomfortable. At times I felt like I'm ready for this pregnancy to be over, but there was also that really special connection that I had, knowing what an absolute gift that pregnancy was. And I didn't have that for my first 2 pregnancies because I hadn't experienced loss prior to those pregnancies. So for Lucas, I was just so aware that I was just so grateful. And yeah, I still had moments where I wanted to complain, but there was always that awareness. So if you are feeling like your experience of pregnancy is not what you wanted, can you lean into that really unique perspective that you have about how much of a miracle it is? And yes, of course, if you haven't had a loss, you still know that it's a miracle and you can still feel that, but there really is something different if you've lost a wanted pregnancy and then you've fallen pregnant again. There's that connection to that absolute joy of carrying a healthy baby. So lean into those good feelings. The anxiety will still be there. You definitely need a way to manage it, but you can also lean into the joy as well. And when I put this idea out to you guys on Instagram, I got so many responses from women sharing that same experience, that they went into pregnancy after loss quite hesitant and not wanting to connect and afraid and really being in that fear state. And then they lost babies and they regretted not having the time that they did have, not enjoying the 6 weeks, the 8 weeks, allowing themselves to feel those good feelings, and going into subsequent pregnancies really wanting to tap back into the joy of the experience. And I don't want to downplay when you want a baby so much and you're putting your all into it. I know how crippling those feelings of anxiety can be, but I hear from women all around the world, and it was my experience as well, that leaning into those good feelings as much as you can, allowing your body to experience the excitement, to experience the joy and the hope, it makes the experience so much more enjoyable in the now. So right now you get to enjoy that pregnancy rather than holding back the enjoyment until the baby is in your arms, because 40 weeks is a really long time. And you don't want to feel that way for 40 weeks. And you don't even want to feel that way for 8 weeks if your baby happens to pass away. Because if you lose your baby, it is going to break your heart either way. Whether you hold yourself in this fear and this uncertainty and those horrible feelings, or whether you allow yourself to experience joy, the pain of loss is going to be just as bad. So please let yourself lean into that joy. Let yourself experience that excitement, because it is worth those feelings for you. And also, I do believe that baby feels them as well. And then motherhood after loss has been very different as well. Obviously, my experience will be different perhaps to yours. I think having a third baby also changes your experience with your first or your second. I think we just naturally stress more about certain things than you do with your third. But I just find that my experience of having a baby after my 3 losses, there was such a sweetness to it. I just savored all of it. The sleeplessness, their complete dependence on you for that first year. Just like in pregnancy, there are still hard moments. He is definitely my most, let's say, spirited child. So he never stops moving. He's into everything. He definitely copies 5-year-old and 8-year-old behaviors instead of 2-year-old behaviors, which in a 2-year-old, it's infuriating because he also doesn't have the sense to know when to stop and when to not. So he challenges me on every level as a mother. And yet, just like in pregnancy, I have that awareness of, gosh, what if I'd stopped? What if I'd given up? And it just always brings me back to, I'm just so grateful for this little being, even if he is being a menace, as we like to call him. And it is a sweet experience of motherhood. And I know this is not always the experience after loss, because I do work with some women who have experienced loss, and therefore their experience of motherhood is that they're so worried that something will happen. And I did feel like that for a while. I found that loss really heightened my awareness of how fragile life was, and therefore I was so fearful of anything happening to my kids. I didn't like them getting into cars with other people, and I was really afraid. But I think after really doing that work of leaning into uncertainty and realizing how all of life is uncertain, and not to be morbid, but just that awareness of death, and something that we don't really think too much about, especially in the West. We kind of, I don't know, we just don't really have good ways to deal with death or have it as an everyday awareness. But my experience of loss really did make me aware of that. And of course, I still work in this space. So I'm working with women every day who've experienced loss, and that whilst it's difficult and sometimes I just feel like I get all your emotions and I have to do the work to process them, but I'm grateful for that awareness because it just makes me, even on the hard days, because mothering is really, really hard some days. Even on the hard days, I have that connection to, I am still so grateful for this experience and that it could all end tomorrow, and I'm going to enjoy everything I can right now because the moment we have right now is all we have. And so I want to encourage you, if you've experienced loss, try not to stay in the replaying of all the horribleness. Do the work that you need to process what has been. And then don't stay in the fear of the future and what it could look like and all the negative scenarios and worrying about all the possibilities. Allow yourself to be here and now. So if here and now is trying to conceive, let yourself feel excited. Let yourself dream of the future and dream of the positive future you want, not of all the negative possibilities. If you are currently pregnant, rather than worrying about potentially losing this baby, losing this pregnancy, let yourself feel excited. Imagine that baby growing within you and send that baby all your love. If you are a mum with a baby in your arms after a loss, let yourself just enjoy this beautiful moment, whether they are screaming, whether they're unsettled. And of course, this is not to shame you if you are feeling like this is hard and you need help and you're not coping. That's not what I'm saying, because I think we also do a really shit job of supporting new mums. And I think sometimes mums after a loss feel like they have to do everything and be everything and savor everything. And that's not what I'm saying. But I just want you to keep that reminder of that joy and keep leaning into that joy as much as you can. If you have experienced a loss and you are now pregnant or you are now a mum, I would love to hear your experiences, and I know my community would as well, so please leave them in the comments below. If you have experienced a loss and you are looking for practices to help move through some of those emotions, I have a Healing After Miscarriage series, and I'll leave that below. I also have written a book about it that will be linked below as well. If you are dealing with pregnancy anxiety, I have a series around that. All of my relevant series will be linked below, so go and check that out after this video if you feel called to. Thank you for being here today. Namaste.